This account comes from the first day, Elizabeth Caldwell's wedding day, wed and widowed within hours by circumstances no one could have foreseen. She wrote this in her own words and kindly read it for us so that it may be added to the history of the zombie war archives. Grant her your grace and your understanding. Her first day was as all of ours were, terrifying and confusing. She did not know what she was surviving. None of us did.
The apocalypse started on my wedding day, and I missed all of it. Every single sign. The hotel room smelled of hairspray and my mother's perfume, something sharp and expensive she'd worn to every wedding in the family, and her own divorce party. Joy by Jean Patou, a bottle she'd kept in the back of her wardrobe for 15 years, waiting for occasions special enough to justify the cost. I knew this because she'd told me, because she dabbed it behind my ears that morning, while explaining that a bride should smell of something memorable, something that would linger in photographs, and memory long after the day itself had faded. I was holding still while she attacked my veil with pin after pin, each one a tiny violence against my scalp. The veil was antique, borrowed from her own mother's wedding in 1962. The lace yellowed at the edges in a way that only showed in certain light. She'd spent 6 months restoring it. Now she worked with the same concentration, the same absolute focus on details that mattered. Behind us, the television flickered blue and silent. A BBC reporter, I think, a woman with severe hair and a navy jacket, standing in front of a map I didn't examine closely. Red ticker scrolling beneath her solemn face, words compressed to their essentials. M1 closed. Police advise. Avoid area. The sound was off. My sister had muted it hours ago, had insisted that the playlist she'd spent 3 months perfecting, indie folk for the ceremony, classic soul for the reception, carefully curated transitions for each stage of the day, could not compete with newsread addiction and strange so-called emergency broadcasts. I was told to think of nothing but happy thoughts, as a wedding shouldn't be anything but happy. Now the silence was its sound, the kind that fills a room when something important is being said in another language, one you've decided not to learn. My phone kept lighting up, again and again, the buzz against wood like a trapped insect, like a heartbeat, like something trying to get out, insistent. I should have known then this day wouldn't go the way I wanted, but I was blissfully unaware of the world outside my perfectly curated day. I watched the screen glow, watched it fade, then I watched my hands in the mirror instead. The way my hands rested in my lap, the nails I'd had done 3 days prior in a pale pink that was meant to look natural and cost £40 to achieve. I was watching my mother's face behind me, her mouth pursed in concentration, her own reflection showing the strain of a woman who had raised 2 daughters alone and was now, finally, in her words, releasing one into someone else's care. The phone buzzed again. M25 is murder. Might miss the ceremony. Aunt Ruth. I read it without meaning to, the text appearing in the corner of the mirror where the phone lay screen up. Aunt Ruth lived in Bromley, drove a Volvo she treated like a family member, complained about traffic with the passion other people reserved for politics or sport. Murder was her word for any delay over 5 minutes. I smiled at the familiarity of it, the way she made her own inconvenience into drama, into something that required an audience. Then, something's kicked off in town. Police everywhere. Might be late. Cousin Mike, he was younger, 23, worked in recruitment and dressed like he was still trying to get signed by a record label. Kicked off was his phrase for any gathering larger than 10 people. Football hooligans kicked off. Festival crowds kicked off. It meant nothing specific. carried no weight beyond his own need to be where excitement was happening. I set the phone face down. My mother noticed. She noticed everything, had built her life on noticing, and made a small sound of approval. "Good," she said. "Today is yours. Let them wait." Then, from my university mate, who'd trained across from Bristol, I turned the phone back over at her personal text notification. At Paddington, trains cancelled. Something about quarantine? Hiring a car, we'll drive, should make it to the reception. "I'm so sorry. Sarah?" Her name was Sarah. We'd shared a house in our final year, had seen each other through breakups and dissertation crises, and the particular loneliness of being 21, and convinced that adulthood was a door that would open only for other people. She'd been the first to RSVP, yes, had booked her train ticket the same day, had sent me photographs of her outfit for approval. Quarantine. The word sat strangely in the text, in the context of my wedding morning, in the room that smelled of antique lace and expensive perfume, and the particular tension of a mother adjusting her daughter's veil. Quarantine was for airports, for diseases in other countries, on other continents, in news reports that I wasn't paying attention to. I laughed. Actually laughed, there in that hotel room in Surrey, while my mother yanked my head left then right to get the angle of the veil correct. I replied, "You? Drive? You're mad. I love you." I'd laughed while the reporter on that muted screen gestured at footage of the motorway at a standstill, the camera helicopter shot and distant, cars rendered to coloured dots, smoke rising somewhere north of Luton in a grey column from an unseen fire. I'd laughed while my mother said, "Hold still," and my phone kept buzzing with words I didn't make space for. Closures, lockdown, travel restrictions, riots, unrest, infected. The words meant nothing. They were vocabulary from a different reality, a different genre, the kind of film Sarah and I had watched at university, where the threat was always external, and the heroes always survived through virtue, or luck, or narrative necessity. They had no purchase on this room, this morning, this version of myself I'd spent 27 years constructing from magazines and films, and careful observation of women who seemed to know what they were doing. I had space for nothing but the mirror, the dress, the reflection that was finally matching the image I'd carried since I was 15, and first imagined this day. The woman in white who was about to become Mrs. Something Else entirely. Someone with a joint account, a mortgage we'd been pre-approved for subject to final documentation, a kitchen from the John Lewis showroom in Kingston with the sage green cabinets and the induction hob, and the breakfast bar where we would eat toast on weekend mornings and discuss our plans for children, for holidays, for the decades unspooling ahead of us in orderly progression. But the dead were already walking. I just wasn't watching. I remember the drive from the church to the reception. The hired car smelled of leather and my mother's perfume, which had intensified to something almost aggressive in the enclosed space. I sat in the back of the white Mercedes with my hands folded in my lap, staring down at my left hand. The ring was still catching the light, still unfamiliar, still tight enough to leave a faint mark where it hadn't been there that morning. I kept turning it, a quarter turn clockwise, then back. A nervous habit I didn't know I had. The ring was white gold, 14 carat, from a jeweller in Richmond that my husband's mother had recommended. We'd chosen it together 6 months prior in a shop that had served tea while we deliberated between types of gold. The band was plain, deliberately so. I'd rejected diamonds, rejected patterns, rejected anything that would catch on gloves or stockings, or the fabric of daily life. I wanted something I could wear without thinking, without adjusting, without constant awareness of its presence. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it, the way it trapped my finger, the way it marked me as someone who had made promises before she understood what she was promising. I didn't look out the windows, didn't notice anything. I know that now with something like shame. The small country road almost empty, the grey afternoon light, the shapes of trees passing too fast to identify. My uncle's friend was driving, a man I'd met twice before at family gatherings, who worked in insurance and had a laugh that showed too many teeth. He kept muttering, low enough that my mother could pretend not to hear, loud enough that I caught fragments against the hum of the engine. "Strange," he said. "Rush hour. This road is usually packed." "Probably the football," my mother said. She was pressed against me, her thigh hot through my dress, radiating certainty like heat. "Everyone's indoors watching the match." There was no match. I knew that even then. It was late August, the season mostly over, the summer stretching ahead with its own empty weekends. But I let her say it. I let the silence settle back over us like a blanket pulled too tight, and I kept turning the ring. Flash, dim, flash. The Mercedes slowed. I glanced up finally and saw the manor house gates ahead. Not the queue of decorated cars I'd imagined, the procession of guests arriving in celebratory clusters. Just the gates, standing open, and beyond them the long drive lined with oak trees that should have been beautiful but looked suddenly too dark, too close together, like they were hiding something in their shadows. "Here we are," the driver said. His voice had gone strange, tight. He fussed with his phone as he stopped. I could see the crease of his brow in the rearview mirror. I looked back down at my hand. The ring had stopped turning. It fit now, and when I tried to slide it off to adjust it, to give my fingers something to do, it wouldn't come. I stepped out of the car, with my hand still trapped in its new jewellery, my mother already fussing with my train, and I walked into that half-empty room, smiling. The reception was where I started noticing. Not the ceremony. The ceremony had gone off without a hitch, the vicar's kind, forgettable face, the vows spoken to someone I could still believe I knew. The light through the stained glass had been red and blue across my husband's shoulder, and I'd thought, this is it. This is the beginning. I was wrong about that too. Something had already begun very far away, so very different to the married life I had imagined. The manor house was meant to hold 200 guests. I knew because I'd argued about the seating chart for 3 weeks, negotiating feuds and dietary requirements, and my mother-in-law's insistence that her bridge partners absolutely had to be at the reception, as she knew no one else. But when I walked into that oak-panelled room on my new husband's arm, I counted the filled chairs without meaning to. 37. Maybe 40, if you included the children squirming in their good clothes at the back, the ones who weren't meant to be counted in the adult numbers, but who had to sit somewhere. "Traffic," my mother said, appearing at my elbow with a glass of something sparkling. "Bloody countryside." I nodded and smiled, and let her press the glass into my hand. But I was looking at the gaps, at the empty place cards still standing in their little frames, waiting for people who I know now weren't coming. At my sister, who should have been laughing with her university friends, instead standing by the windows with her phone held low, screen glowing against her pale dress. The DJ started the playlist. The first song was meant to be our entrance music, triumphant and celebratory. It sounded thin in all that space, like a party in a room that hadn't been told the celebration had started. I didn't have my phone. My sister had taken it before the ceremony. "No distractions," she'd whispered, sliding it into her own bag, and I hadn't thought to ask for it back. So I was watching blind while everyone else was reading the end of the world in real time. I noticed the staff first. The catering team, in their black trousers and white shirts, moving between tables with plates of something expensive and small. They kept glancing towards the service entrance, not at the guests, not at the clock, at the door. One of them, a girl with dark hair pulled back too tight, stopped mid-step with a tray of canapés balanced on her palm. She had the phone in her other hand, trying to hide it from the room. Her mouth had gone slack, lips slightly parted, like she'd forgotten how to close them. Then she moved, fast, almost running, toward that door. She didn't look back. The tray went with her, abandoned on a sideboard, and no one else on the team seemed to notice or care. They were all looking at their phones now, the ones tucked in apron pockets, the ones they weren't supposed to have out. My husband touched my elbow. "Speech soon," he said. He was smiling, pink-cheeked from the champagne, still believing in the future we'd planned. "You ready?" We were so blissfully unaware of what was happening. I opened my mouth to answer and heard something from outside, distant, muffled by the oak panels and the thin music. A shout, maybe, or a scream cut short. Hard to tell the difference in a room full of people pretending to celebrate. My sister was still by the window. She'd stopped looking at her phone. She was looking out, down toward the car park, and her hand had gone to her throat. I started walking toward her. I don't know why. Perhaps to ask for my phone back. Maybe because she was the only person in that room who looked like she knew something I didn't. I never reached her. The lights flickered. Everyone looked up, that collective reflex, and in the moment of darkness I heard another sound from outside. Closer now. Heavy, dragging. The scrape of something across gravel that didn't sound like tires. When the lights steadied, 3 more of the catering staff were gone. Just gone, the service door swinging gently on its hinges, letting in a draft that smelled odd, no strange. Like smoke, but chemical and entirely out of place. My mother found me. She always could. "Smile," she said, low and urgent, her fingers digging into my arm. "People are watching. Smile." I smiled. The ring was still tight on my finger, and I smiled while my sister finally turned from the window with something in her eyes I'd scarcely seen in them before. Panic. "What is it?" I asked her. She shook her head, looked at my husband who had moved from my side and was now laughing with his mates by the bar. Looked at my mother, still holding my arm like I might run. Looked at me in my white dress, with my white bouquet, and my white ignorance. "Nothing," she said. "It's nothing. Don't." The scream came then. Close. Outside the windows, in the garden, with the fairy lights we'd paid extra for. A man's voice, rising and then cut off with a sound like wet fabric tearing. Everyone heard it. Everyone stopped. My husband was still holding his champagne glass, frozen mid-gesture, his face caught between confusion and the beginning of understanding. I saw him look at me. I saw him try to smile, to reassure, to hold on to the shape of the day we'd planned. I looked down at my hand, the ring, and finally, something deep within me screamed that I wasn't getting the life I'd imagined. My sister grabbed my arm. "We have to go," she said. "Now. Right now." "But I started. The service door slammed open. It hit the wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, and the smell hit first. Copper and bile and something else, like meat left too long in summer heat. Then he came through. A kitchen worker. White shirt, black trousers, apron that was once white but wasn't anymore. It was red, wet, dripping, saturated and shiny. He moved sideways, shoulder first, like he'd forgotten how doors worked, like his body was no longer taking instructions from whatever part of him still possessed thought. He made a sound, not words, just air and blood, a wet gurgle that bubbled from his throat with each attempt to breathe. I saw his neck then, saw what had happened to it, the skin torn in a way that wasn't clean, wasn't surgical. The wound was violent, the edges were ragged, pulped, as if something had torn at him like a dog with a toy, just destroying. Then he fell, not dramatically, not slowly. His legs simply stopped being legs, stopped holding, stopped functioning. His back hit the floor with a sound like meat dropped from height, wet and heavy and final. The red spread beneath him, too fast, too much, pooling in a way that seemed impossible, that suggested there was more liquid in a human body than I'd ever imagined. But my husband was already across the room. I saw him kneeling, his back to me, his hands pressing against the kitchen worker's neck, the red spilling between his fingers, over his wrists, onto the cuffs of his white shirt, the shirt I'd helped him iron that morning, standing too close in the hotel bathroom while he shaved. He was a doctor. He would always be a doctor first, in any room where someone was hurt, and the kitchen worker kept moving. That was the worst part, the part I would carry, that I would see when I closed my eyes. His hand still pressed to his neck, still trying to hold back what couldn't be held, fingers slipping in the wetness, losing purchase, finding it again. His eyes open, following James, following the light, following nothing. His mouth working, opening and closing, the gurgle continuing even now, even as the pool beneath him grew, even as his face went from flushed to pale to grey in the space of seconds. "Don't look," my sister said, but I did. I watched his hand fall away from his neck, watched it land in the pool, watched the fingers twitch once, twice, then still. Watched his eyes fix on something above him, ceiling, heaven, nothing, and stay there, open, unblinking, while the room erupted into screaming around him. He was dead. I knew it with certainty that had nothing to do with medical training, nothing to do with James still pressing against a wound that had stopped bleeding, that had nothing left to spill. He was dead, and he had died in my wedding reception, and the music was still playing, the playlist still running, the song that was meant for our first dance filling the air while a man bled out on the floor. Then they came through the door. The shapes, the things that had done this, that had made the wound, that had left him to die in a spreading pool of red while they moved on to other things, other people, other warm bodies that still held what they wanted. They didn't look at him, didn't step around him, simply walked over, through, the way you walk through shallow water, the way you move through grass, indifferent to what lies beneath. I saw a foot press into the blood trail from the door, saw it rise again red, saw it track prints across the floor toward where James still knelt, still trying, still being a doctor in a room where healing had no place. I saw the thing in blue, the pale shade of my sister's dress, the colour of my bridesmaids, and I understood, finally, what I was seeing. Not illness, but infection. Not anything that had a cure, or a treatment, or a prayer of stopping. I saw what my wedding had become. My sister grabbed my arm, hard, bruising. "Now," she said, "we have to—" "But James, look." I looked, past my husband's bent back, to what was coming through the door the chef had erupted from. More and more of them, the shapes resolving into figures, into people who weren't people anymore. Wedding guests and catering staff and strangers in suits and dresses that matched our own in their formality, their complete inappropriateness. The woman in blue, I can remember her face. I don't want to, but I could see her hands reaching, her mouth opening, her teeth. "James," I shouted. Loud this time, loud enough to cut through the screaming that had started somewhere in the room, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. He looked up. He saw me. He saw the door behind me. He saw the thing in blue that was almost close enough to touch his shoulder, close enough to reach his neck where his collar was open, where his hands were already covered in someone else's blood. He moved, fast, survival overriding healing, and he was running toward us, stumbling, leaving the kitchen worker dead on the floor. His hands were red, wet, leaving prints on my white sleeve as he grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the service door my sister was trying to open. The kitchen worker was moving behind us. I had watched him die, I was sure of it, but now his body convulsed and twitched like electric shocks were surging through him. The room filled with things that didn't care, that didn't stop, that kept coming. My sister had her hands on a wooden panel that looked like part of the panelling, the oak matching centuries-old beams above. She was pulling, pushing, finding the catch that would release it, her fingers slipping on carved scrollwork meant to hide the mechanism from view. "Hurry," my husband said. His voice was strange, thick, the voice of someone who had already seen too much in too short a time. "I'm trying." A woman in coral silk grabbed my arm. One of the guests, someone I'd greeted an hour before, someone whose name I couldn't remember now. "What's happening?" she asked. Her face was flushed with champagne and confusion, her lipstick smeared at the corner. "Is it a prank? Is this some kind of—" She stopped, saw what was coming through the kitchen door. The wet sounds from before multiplied, advancing. The thing in blue, now more red. I didn't see what happened next. My sister found the catch. The panel swung open. She pulled me through, and I grabbed my husband's hand, and he grabbed my mother's, and we spilled into the service corridor just as the coral silk woman started screaming, a high sound that followed us into the dark. She turned and ran towards the main door. Others followed her. A man in morning dress, his tie loosened, his face blank with shock. A teenage boy in a suit too large for him, probably a cousin, most likely someone I'd been introduced to and forgotten. They ran toward the garden, toward the sounds we'd heard earlier, toward the shapes that were already moving in the darkness beyond the windows. "Don't!" my sister shouted, more panic in her voice. "Not that way!" They didn't listen. People never listen in the moment of panic, always choosing the familiar over the understood, the known door over the hidden one. I watched them go, watched them push through the heavy doors into the grey afternoon, and I saw what waited for them, saw the shapes that had been in the garden, that had made the sounds, that had been the cause of the screaming we'd heard earlier. The doors swung almost closed. I didn't see what happened next. I heard it. My sister stood in the corridor. "Now!" she said, and grabbed my arm again. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My husband's bloody hand on my back trying to push me forward, my mother's face white and blank. But others had seen the door. Another man in a chef's jacket, his own apron still white, still unstained, pushed past us with enough force to knock my shoulder against the frame. He was followed by a woman in a hat too large for the occasion, her mouth open in a soundless cry, her hands clutching a handbag that suddenly seemed the most important thing in the world. The corridor was narrow, too narrow for all of us. My sister was behind me pulling the door shut. Then I heard more sounds muffled by the closed door. Not the wet sounds from before, not the screaming. Something else. A thud, heavy and final. A body falling or being dropped. A sound of impact that meant someone had stopped running, had turned to fight, had made the mistake of thinking these things could be fought. I was still looking back when the pounding started. Fists against wood, the sound carrying through the old panelling like a heartbeat. Then voices, raised and desperate, calling names I didn't recognise, then my own name. Mrs. Caldwell, please. Mrs. Caldwell, open the door. And I was reaching for the handle, my hand finding my sister's instead, her fingers wrapping around mine and pulling me away. "They'll follow," someone said, panicked. A man in chef's whites, the one who'd pushed past us, already ahead in the corridor, his face slick with sweat. "They'll follow, and they'll bring them with them. We have to—" "Move," my sister said. Not to him, to us, to me and my mother and my husband, with his bloody hands still leaving prints on everything he touched. We moved. The corridor was narrow, service-lit, the kind of passage meant for staff and deliveries and emergencies that never happened. Concrete underfoot, walls painted that particular shade of institutional cream that aged badly, that showed every scuff and mark. My sister was ahead, her pale dress visible in the dim light, her heels clicking a rhythm that was too fast, too urgent, nothing like the careful walk she'd practiced for her bridesmaid duties. Among all the chaos, the only thing my brain could hold on to was how had my sister known about the door? Something so stupid and unimportant, but completely at the forefront of my mind. The pounding behind us changed. Not fists anymore, something heavier. Shoulders, maybe. Bodies thrown against wood that had stood for centuries and might not stand much longer. "Faster," my sister said. We ran. My mother in her good shoes, her net hat finally gone, her breathing ragged and loud in the enclosed space. My husband beside me, his hand on my elbow, guiding me around corners. The chef ahead, faster than all of us, disappearing around bends and reappearing as a white flash in the dimness. The sounds from behind us changed again, the wood splintering, or the catch giving way, or something else entirely. The wet sounds of movement where there should have been nothing but panicked guests, screaming, renewed, closer now, carrying down the corridor like water. "Don't look back," my sister said. "Don't stop, don't—" A door ahead swinging closed after the chef's fast exit. She hit its shoulder first, spilled through into grey afternoon, and the smell of diesel and garbage, and the ordinary stink of service entrances. The rest of us followed, my mother gasping, my husband silent, me with my hand on my chest where my heart was hammering against my ribs. My sister was already moving, not looking back at the door we'd come through, the door that was still swinging slowly on its hinges, that still connected us to whatever was happening in the corridor behind. She was crossing the car park, her heels loud on tarmac, heading for— "James!" my mother screamed. I turned. He was behind us, had stopped, was struggling with something that had hands and teeth, and a suit that matched his own in its formal cut. A man, or had been. White eyes, no pupils, mouth opening and closing in a snapping motion that had nothing human in its rhythm. His hands were on James's lapels, pulling him close, those teeth reaching for the exposed skin of his throat where his collar was open. James twisted, not fighting, not striking, twisting the way you escape a grip, the way you slip free from something that holds too tight. His jacket went one way, his body the other, and the creature, the man thing, toppled forward with the momentum. But as James twisted free, he stumbled, caught himself with his left hand on the tarmac, and I saw the creature's teeth graze his forearm. Not a full bite, not the clamp and hold I'd seen in the kitchen worker's neck, but a ragged semicircle of marks where the teeth had scraped and torn, skin lifting like wet paper, blood beading then running in thin lines toward his wrist. James didn't look at it. He was already moving, already running, already grabbing my mother's arm and pulling her towards the truck. But I saw him touch it once, quick, the way you touch a burn or a cut to confirm it's real. then wipe his hand on his shirt without looking at the stain. I looked around, really looked, now that the door was shut, now that the corridor was behind us, now the world really seemed to be ending. The car park was chaos, people I recognised, people I didn't, running, falling, standing frozen in the space between understanding and action. A woman in an ugly dress, swinging her handbag at a man in catering blacks who kept advancing despite the blows, who reached for her even as she hit him, even as the bag connected with his face and made sounds that should have stopped him. A teenage boy, the cousin in the too large suit, dragging someone by the arm toward a car that wouldn't start, the engine turning over and catching nothing. Eating. That was what I saw, what I understood with a clarity that felt like falling. They were eating people. They were attacking, biting, tearing, crouching down and tearing into people, no purpose beyond the attack itself. They bit and tore and consumed. James was beside me, breathing hard, his shirt untucked, his throat marked with red where the teeth had grazed, had almost found purchase. "Run," he said, but I was already running, already following my sister who had stopped, who was standing in front of her truck, the pickup, the ridiculous, impractical, bright red pickup she'd saved so hard for, that she'd driven to the wedding against my mother's protests, that I'd told her was inappropriate, ostentatious, wrong for her. Too American, I'd said. Too big for English roads. What will you do with it, Sophie? Where will you park it? Who needs a truck in Surrey? She was fumbling in her bag. The little beaded clutch that matched her dress, that she'd insisted was big enough, practical enough, that I'd rolled my eyes at while she packed it with essentials I hadn't thought to ask about. The keys. She was finding them, pulling them free, and I was running toward her, James behind me, my mother somewhere, my mother. James reached her first. He had my mother's arm, was guiding her, half carrying her, her feet stumbling on the tarmac in shoes, meant for celebration. "In!" he said, low and urgent. "Get in, get in!" My sister was already in the driver's seat, the truck's engine catching with a roar that was too loud, too desperate, too immediate. The door on my side hung open, James's hand on my back pushing me up, into the seat behind my sister, my mother beside me gasping, her hand crushing mine. James jumped in. I tried to arrange the tangle of my dress around me. The passenger door slammed, the sound of it like a gunshot, and then a man crashed into the door beside me. The lifted side of the truck, the height that had made it impractical, ridiculous, wrong for English roads, now the only thing keeping him from my window. Due to the height of the truck, I could only see his head. His mouth was stained with blood, teeth gnashing, hands pouring at the glass, leaving smudges that caught the afternoon light. I didn't recognise him. A guest, maybe, or staff, or someone from the road, from the chaos spilling beyond the manor's grounds. The truck lurched. My sister had found first gear, had released the clutch too fast, the vehicle jumping forward with a sound like gears protesting. The man fell away, or we left him behind, or something happened that I saw in the side mirror and refused to process. Then the sound, from my mother's side, the rear door, the one next to her, the handle making that particular noise of someone pulling, yanking, desperate. A face at the window, a man I didn't know, light blue shirt stained dark, his hand lifting to the glass, and I saw, 2 fingers clearly bitten off, the stumps raw and pumping, the remaining fingers spread against the window like he was trying to push through, like he could will himself inside if need was great enough. "Let me in!" he yelled. I heard it through the glass, through the engine noise, through my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. "Please, please, they're coming, they're—" He looked back, the motion too fast, too frightened, and when he looked back at us, his eyes had changed, the desperation curdling into something else, something harder, something that recognised us for what we were, safe, enclosed, moving away, and him for what he was, outside, exposed, left behind. "Let me in!" he screamed. His hand became a fist, pounding against the glass, the frame, the metal of the door. "You cows! You fuck!" Something cut him off, maybe himself, realising that noise was not a good choice. My sister had locked the doors. I realised it then, understood that she'd done it before she had moved, before the man at my window, before this new man with his missing fingers, and his rage and his certainty that we owed him something, that our survival required his inclusion. "Don't look," my sister said, but she was looking in the rearview mirror, her eyes meeting mine for a moment, and I saw something there that I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not hesitation, the mechanical certainty of someone who had already made this choice, who had made it hours ago or days ago, or in the moment she'd first understood what was happening and started planning for exactly this. She restarted the truck this time, not stalling it as the car lurched forwards. The man with the missing fingers ran alongside us for 3 steps, 4, his mouth open in words I couldn't hear and didn't need to. Then he fell behind, the truck finding speed, gravel hitting the undercarriage as the wheels spun, the gap in the hedge ahead, and I watched him in the mirror growing smaller, growing desperate, turning to face what followed him with nothing but his rage and his injury and the locked doors of vehicles that wouldn't stop, that couldn't stop, that had already made their choices. The hedge scraped both sides. My sister didn't slow. The truck was high, ridiculous, saved for and criticised, and now the only thing that mattered. Branches snapped against metal, against glass, against the raised chassis that cleared obstacles my Renault would have met with its undercarriage. But I still cringed, the damage to the paintwork I had thought about at the time. My stupid, stumbling brain still clinging to thoughts that didn't matter. Then we were through. Grass verge, the A3 visible to our right, the traffic that wasn't moving, the shapes between the cars that moved strangely, that moved like the man at my window, like the woman in blue, like everything that had been human and wasn't anymore. "Left," my sister said, not to me, to herself. Her hands were steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the gap ahead, the track that led away from the road and the stopped cars, and the shapes that were already turning, already seeing us, already beginning to move in our direction with that terrible patience. I looked at my mother. Her face was blank, white, empty of everything she'd been that morning. The certainty, the control, the absolute conviction that the world operated according to rules she understood. Her hand was still crushing mine, the bones of our fingers grinding together, and neither of us let go. James was silent in the front seat. His throat was marked where the teeth had grazed, red rising to the surface, but his left arm was worse. He kept it turned away from me, pressed against the door, but I could see the sleeve of his shirt darkening where the blood had spread, where the graze was still leaking. He touched it again, more deliberately now, and I saw his jaw tighten, saw something pass across his face that wasn't pain exactly, more like recognition, like a doctor understanding a diagnosis he didn't want to make. "You should," I started. "It's fine," he said, quick, sharp, not looking at me. "Just a scratch. Let your sister focus on the road." But he wasn't focusing on the road. He was looking at his arm, at the darkening fabric, at the shape of teeth marks that hadn't broken through completely, but had done enough. Enough for what? I didn't know yet. "Where?" I asked. The word came out wrong, too loud, too desperate in the enclosed space of the cab. My sister didn't answer. She was watching the rearview mirror, watching the lane behind us, watching for what followed. The man with the missing fingers was gone, left behind, but others weren't. Others had seen the truck, heard the engine, understood that movement meant life, and life meant... "Just drive," I said. The words were strange in my mouth, the wrong speaker, the wrong tone, but she nodded once and kept driving, and I understood that I was cargo to be rescued, that she had planned for this while I was pinning my veil, that my wedding day was over and my survival had begun without my consultation or consent. The ring was still tight on my finger. I gripped the seat with my left hand, my right hand gripped by my mother, and I watched the hedgerows blur past and didn't ask again where we were going. I already knew she had a plan. She always had a plan. The truck lurched down a track that was nothing more than 2 ruts through grass, the kind of path meant for tractors or sheep or vehicles that didn't mind the scrape of undergrowth against their chassis. My sister drove without hesitation, without consultation, her eyes finding gaps in the hedge, turns that weren't marked, roots that seemed to spawn from nothing. James was fiddling with the radio. His fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon, the same precision he'd used on the kitchen worker's neck, the same precision that hadn't been enough. He found static, adjusted, found more static, adjusted again. The sound filled the cab like rushing water, like the noise of a world that had stopped transmitting anything coherent. "Try long wave," my sister said. She didn't look at him. "Dad's old radio. Used to get the cricket on long wave. The truck's modded, Dad told me to." James found the band. The static changed pitch, became something older, more distant. He adjusted slowly, carefully, hunting for signal like he was hunting for a pulse. Advised to remain in their homes. A voice, female, calm, reading scripts written by people who hadn't seen what we'd seen. Not to attempt travel. Emergency services are... Then static again. James adjusted back, found the edge of the voice and held it there, words breaking and reforming. "Infected should be considered. Do not approach. Do not attempt to." "Infected," my mother said. The first word since the car park. "They keep saying infected, but it's not..." She stopped, swallowed. "They're not sick. You saw. They're not... They're dead," my sister said. Flat, final. "They're dead and they're moving. That's not infection. That's something else." The track opened onto a proper road. Narrow, unmarked, but tarmac. My sister turned left without hesitation, the truck finding its rhythm on solid ground, the engine settling into a steadier pitch. James had lost the signal. He sat back, his hands in his lap, the blood on them drying now, cracking. He didn't try to speak. None of us did. We drove through country that had stopped being familiar, the hedgerows too dense, the sky too dark, the afternoon failing into something that wasn't quite evening. Then we saw them, stopped cars ahead. Not many, 5, 6, scattered across the road in patterns that made no sense. Some facing forward, some backward, one angled into the ditch with its door hanging open. No hazards, no movement, just the stillness of vehicles abandoned in haste, or stopped by something that hadn't allowed them to continue. My sister braked. The truck slowed, stopped, idling in the middle of a road that had become a graveyard of ordinary journeys interrupted. "Back," my mother whispered. "Go back, find another..." "Can't." My sister was looking in the mirror, and I turned to see what she saw. The track we'd emerged from, the gap in the hedge, shapes were visible there now, distant but moving. Not fast, never fast, but persistent. Only forward. She put the truck in gear. We moved toward the stopped cars, toward whatever had stopped them, toward the end of the road and whatever came after. She nudged one gently, making a space big enough for us to pass though, and I thanked my past self for not bothering to talk her out of the strange pickup truck modifications she wanted to make. Cages over the headlights to prevent them from breaking, a push bar at the front giant and offensive, pushing the insurance sky high. The lift kit that raised the already high cab even further up from the surface of the road. The truck was high enough to see over most of them. A silver Volvo, driver's door open, empty. A hatchback with windows starred but intact. A BMW in the ditch, nose down, wheels in the air. My sister drove around them without slowing, finding gaps between metal and hedge, the truck's width making the passage narrow, tight, my mother's breath catching each time we scraped close. I looked in the cars as we passed. Empty, most of them. One had a bag on the passenger seat, open, contents spilled, makeup, a phone, a child's drawing in bright crayon. Another had a dark smear across the windscreen. I didn't examine closely. Another car had its door open. Red smudges adorned the driver's seat and the open door. Blood pooled on the ground near it. The sight made bile rise in my throat. "Don't," my sister said. I turned from the window to meet her eyes in the rearview mirror. I didn't know if she meant don't look, don't stop, don't think. I obeyed anyway. The road opened beyond the cars, clear tarmac stretching into the grey afternoon. My sister accelerated, the engine rising to a pitch that sounded like escape. We drove without speaking, without direction, the radio hissing static that James hadn't turned off, the sound filling the cab like breath. The fuel light came on past Alton. We took back roads and weaved through the countryside down roads that were barely more than thin white lines on the sat-nav in my sister's car. A small orange glow on the dashboard, unremarkable, ordinary, the same light I'd seen in my Renault a dozen times before, the same warning that meant find a station, find a pump, find 20 minutes to solve the problem. "We need to stop," James said. His voice was strange, hoarse, the first word since the radio voice. "Petrol. We need more fuel." My sister didn't answer. She was watching the road, the mirror, the hedgerows that offered nothing, no sign, no salvation. "There's a station," my mother said. She was holding something, I realised. The truck's manual, the folder in the backseat pocket that held insurance documents and service records, and folded inside, a map. On the map, a village, 5 miles, maybe. The road curves, there's a junction, then... "Show me," my sister said. My mother unfolded the map with shaking hands, the creases worn soft, the paper old, my father's handwriting visible in the margins where he'd marked routes to fishing spots, to pubs, to places that had mattered to him and to no one else. I wondered why she had the map in her car, why of all the things to have in this very moment that she had that. "Here," she said, her finger finding a small symbol, a pump and canopy. "Petrol and a shop. We could get..." She stopped. We all knew what we could get. Food, water, bandages for my husband's arm, the ordinary needs of people who were still alive. My sister followed the map. The road curved, the junction appeared, and we turned onto a narrower lane, 1 car wide, hedgerows brushing both sides. The village appeared suddenly, the way English villages do, houses clustered around a green, a pub with a hanging sign, a church with a steeple visible above the trees. The petrol station was on the far side. My sister circled the village, not entering it. 2 pumps under a canopy that had faded from red to pink, a small shop attached, windows dark, door closed, no cars, no movement. The kind of quiet that meant closed for Sunday, or closed for owner illness, or closed because there was no one left to open it. My sister stopped the truck. The engine ticked. The station sat there, waiting, offering nothing, promising nothing. "Stay here," she said, and opened her door. "No." James's hand was on her arm, stopping her. "We go together, or we don't go." My sister looked at him, at his blood-stained shirt, his unsteady hands, his eyes that had seen too much and understood too little. Then she looked at me. "You stay," she said. "I can help. I can—" "Your dress." She said it flat, practical, the same tone she'd used when I'd criticised the truck. "You can't run in that. You can't climb. You can't fight. You can't do anything but get caught on something and fall." She was already reaching for her door handle. "Stay here. Lock the doors. Watch." Watch what? But she was out, door closing, James following, and I saw him retrieve something from the truck bed. A tire iron, heavy, ridiculous, the kind of tool that came with vehicles and was rarely used. He held it like a weapon, like he'd held nothing before in his life, and they moved together to the side of the truck that you pump petrol. My mother was beside me. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken again, her head on a swivel, turning slowly, methodically, looking out at the surrounding darkness. I followed her gaze. The village was small, isolated, the kind of place that should have had lights in windows, televisions flickering, the ordinary glow of people living their ordinary lives. There were no lights, none. Not in the houses, not in the pub, not in the church with its steeple visible against the darkening sky. Only in one direction, east, I thought, toward the city, toward London, toward whatever was happening there. A faint glow on the horizon, orange and red, the colour of things burning that shouldn't burn. "Mum," I said, "Mum, do you see?" She didn't answer. Her head kept turning, slow, mechanical, searching for something she didn't find. Outside, my sister was at the pump. Old, mechanical, the kind that required payment inside, where you pump petrol and then pay. She pulled the hose free from its holder. James stood beside her, the tire iron loose in his hand, his eyes on the darkness beyond the station, on the hedgerows, on the spaces where things might be moving that he couldn't see. I watched them, watched my sister's hands on the pump, efficient, certain, the same hands that had helped my mum pin my veil that morning, that had taken my phone, that had known what was coming, and tried to give me a few hours of ignorance, that had hoped it wouldn't turn out this way. I watched James shift his weight, the tire iron rising slightly, ready, the posture of someone who had never been in a fight, preparing for one anyway. The truck was warm, enclosed, safe in a way that felt temporary, borrowed, wrong. My mother's breathing was loud beside me, too loud, each exhale carrying something that might have been a word, or might have been nothing. I tried the door handle, confirmed it was locked, confirmed I was trapped inside my sister's planning, her protection, her certainty that I was cargo to be rescued. The pump clicked. The sound was sharp, sudden, final. The noise of a tank filling, of fuel flowing, of a problem solved in the ordinary way, the way that didn't require tire irons or locked doors or the absence of lights on every horizon. I looked out the window, saw my sister's hand on the nozzle, saw James turn toward the sound, saw the relief that flickered across his face before he remembered to be afraid again. They weren't done. I knew that. The click was just the end of one stage, one problem, one moment of mechanical certainty before the next uncertainty began. After what felt like forever, the pump clicked again. Signifying the tank was full, I watched as my sister placed the nozzle back in its holder, the metal clunking against the worn bracket. James looked around, then at the store. He said something to her, words I couldn't hear through the glass, and then moved by himself toward the shop, into the darkness of the store. My sister's head was on a swivel. I saw her track him, her body turning, one hand still resting on the pump, as if she might need to move fast, as if she was calculating distances, timing, escape routes. She started to follow him, took 2 steps, stopped when he disappeared through the doorway. Silence, the kind that wasn't silent, the truck's engine ticking, my mother's breathing beside me, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Then James emerged, 2 bags in his hands, filled to the brim with the random sort of food you find in these little garages, crisps, chocolate bars, bottled water, the kind of sustenance that would keep you moving without ever satisfying you. He was moving fast, not quite running, the bags rustling with his urgency. My sister saw it before he did. I saw her body change, the way her shoulders tightened, her head turning toward the corner of the store. A shape there, emerging from the darkness, coming around the building toward them. Shadowy and uncertain, walking unsteady, that same lurching advance we'd seen at the manor, on the road, in every place we'd tried to leave behind, closer than the others had been. Close enough that James had no time to run, no time to do anything but react as it lunged for him, arms outstretched, mouth open in that snapping motion that had nothing human in its rhythm. He dropped the bags. The tire iron was still in his hand, the heavy metal he'd carried from the truck bed, and he swung it without thinking, without aiming, the way you'd swat at a wasp. It connected with a sound like a melon splitting, like wet wood cracking, like something solid hitting something that had stopped being solid inside. The figure dropped like a stone. No stagger, no cry, no theatrical collapse. Just the sudden absence of upright, the sudden presence of meat and bone sprawled out on the tarmac. James stood over it, the tire iron still raised, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on the thing that had been a man, and now wasn't anything at all. "James," my sister said, loud enough to carry, loud enough to cut through whatever had frozen him. "The bags! Now!" She was already moving, already crouching, already scooping up the spilled contents, crisps packets, water bottles, the random debris of survival, while he stood there with the tire iron trembling in his hand. She grabbed his arm, pulled him, and they ran together toward the truck, the bags bouncing against their legs, James stumbling, my sister pulling him forward with a strength I hadn't known she had. I was already reaching for the locks, already preparing to open, already. "Don't," my mother said, her hand on mine, stopping me, her voice strange and final. "Don't open it until they're here." They were here. My sister's hand on the handle, yanking the door open, throwing the bags in ahead of her, James diving after them, the tire iron clattering against the footwell. The door slammed, the locks engaged, the sound of them sharp and final in the enclosed space. I looked back. The figure on the tarmac was still there, still lying there, and beyond it, from the corner of the store, more shapes emerging. Not 1, 3, 4. Moving with that terrible patience, that persistence that didn't hurry because it didn't need to. "Drive," my mother whispered. My sister was already moving. The engine caught, roared, the truck surging forward with a violence that matched my heartbeat. The shapes fell behind. We left them behind. Some of the food scattered on the tarmac behind us. Some of the contents lost, some saved. The mathematics of survival already calculating loss against gain. We drove. Fast, too fast. The truck's bulk making the narrow road dangerous. The hedgerows scraping close on both sides. My sister didn't slow, didn't look back. Her eyes fixed on whatever was ahead, Whatever escape route she had planned that I didn't know about, hadn't been consulted on, couldn't have contributed to anyway. I looked in the side mirror. The petrol station was already small, distant, the shapes visible only as darkness against darkness, still standing where we'd left them, still watching the direction we'd gone with that terrible patience, that certainty that we would stop eventually, that they would keep coming, that the mathematics of persistence always favoured the dead. The food was in the footwell. James was breathing hard, his hands shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with him. My mother was silent beside me, her head no longer turning, fixed forward on the darkness ahead. We drove through country that had stopped making sense. The sat-nav had lost signal somewhere past the petrol station, the screen frozen on a road that no longer matched the one we travelled. My sister drove by memory or intuition, or some map she'd studied while I wasn't paying attention, turning at unmarked junctions, finding lanes that narrowed to single tracks, hedgerows brushing both sides of the truck like walls closing in. I saw things through the windows. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to name them, but my eyes found them anyway. A field with a cow lying on its side, legs splayed, belly distended, the posture of an animal that had been running and failed, and something bent over it, human-shaped or had been, clothing dark against the pale flank, head down, shoulders working with a rhythm I recognised from James's hands on the kitchen worker's neck. But this wasn't healing. It felt like the sound carried through the closed window, through the engine noise, through my own heartbeat, a wet tearing, a separation of things that had been joined. I looked away before I saw what rose from the body, what turned its head toward our passing, what might have been a face glistening in the moonlight. I found my mother's hand, gripped hard enough to hurt. She didn't react. Another field, another shape, a car in a ditch, hazards still blinking, door open, and something inside that I didn't examine, that I refused to examine. But I saw the hand first, pale against the dark interior, fingers curled, still. Then the rest, arranged in a way that suggested flight interrupted, escape failed, the final position of someone who had tried to lock themselves in and found the lock insufficient. The smell came through the vents, despite everything, despite recirculation and closed windows, a sweetness wrong for summer, wrong for cut grass and hedgerow flowers, the sweetness of processes that should have been hidden, delayed, left for others to discover in daylight with proper equipment and distance. A child's bicycle in the next village, pink with streamers on the handles, abandoned in the middle of the road where my sister drove around it without slowing. No child, no parent, just the bicycle and the open door of a house beyond, and the light inside that was flickering, not electric, the colour of flame consuming something that burned with its own chemistry, its own particular smoke that I could smell now, that was everywhere. That meant the burning was not contained to one place, but spreading, had been spreading, would continue to spread until there was nothing left to consume. "Don't look," my sister said again. She said it to the windscreen, to the road, to herself, maybe. Everyone don't look. But we did. James turned his head at every junction, scanning for movement, for threat, for the shape of things that moved wrong. My mother's eyes were open but unfocused, seeing something I couldn't guess at. And I looked because not looking felt like blindness, felt like the hotel room again, felt like missing the signs all over once more. The truck's engine note changed. I knew that sound from my Renault, from 100 drives to work and back, the pitch rising, the efficiency dropping, the vehicle demanding something it wasn't getting. "Sophie," I said, "the fuel, I know." She knew. Of course, she knew. She'd been watching the gauge since the petrol station for hours, since the bags in the footwell and the tyre iron clattering, and the figure on the tarmac that had dropped like a stone. She'd been waiting for this, planning for this, had probably known exactly how many miles we had left when she started the engine. From the calmness in her voice, I assumed we had enough to reach our destination, wherever that was. "We're close," my mother said. "The turn, after the oak, I remember." James made a sound, not words, something between a groan and a breath, the wet gurgle I'd heard before, in the kitchen worker, in the thing in the suit. "James." I leaned forward, my hand on his shoulder, and the heat through his shirt was shocking, wrong, the heat of someone burning up from inside. "James, talk to me, tell me." He turned. That was the only word for it. Not looked, turned, his whole upper body rotating toward me in a movement that was too fast, too loose, like his spine had forgotten its shape, its limits. His face was grey now, the flush gone, replaced by something pale and waxy and wrong. His eyes, I'd loved his eyes, brown and kind and steady, were wrong too. Clouded, unfocused, the pupils too large or too small, or simply not there anymore. His mouth opened. The sound that came out wasn't his voice, wasn't anyone's voice, just air and something else, something thick, the same gurgle, the same wrongness. "James," I said, backing away, pressing myself against my mother, against the door, against anything that would put distance between me and what was in the passenger seat. "James, it's me, it's—" My sister braked, hard. The truck skidded, turning onto what, I thought, might be a drive, but the speed snapped my head against the headrest, made the ring on my finger bite into my flesh. James hit the dash and recovered slower than the rest of us. "Out," my sister said. She was already opening her door, already pulling the tyre iron from where she'd wedged it, already moving around the front of the truck toward James's side. "Get out, both of you, now!" "But James!" "Now!" My mother moved. I'd forgotten she could move, that she'd been capable of anything beyond sitting and staring and crushing my hand. She was out her door, pulling me with her, her grip iron on my wrist, dragging me away from the truck, from James, from the thing that had been my husband, and now sat in the passenger seat with its mouth open and its hands reaching for the door handle. My sister stepped forwards and opened the door, jumping back and out of the way. James, whatever was James, pushed the door open, fell out almost onto the verge, onto the grass, onto the country lane that had no name and no witness. My sister stood over him, the tyre iron in her hand, the same tyre iron James had swung at the thing in the car park, the same one he'd used to save himself, to save us, to buy time that had run out somewhere between the manor and this lane, somewhere between a graze on his forearm and the thing that had climbed inside him through that broken skin. "No," I said, or tried to say. My mother's hand was over my mouth, pressing hard, her body between me and what was happening, her eyes fixed on my sister with an expression I couldn't read. My sister raised the tyre iron. James, whatever was James, looked up at her, looked through her, looked at me, maybe, or at nothing, or at the thing it wanted that was still warm and moving and alive in the field beyond the hedge. She brought it down. I didn't see the rest. My mother turned me, pulled me, walked me away down the drive in my stupid, uncomfortable shoes, in a dress meant for joy, in a life that had ended while I was looking at my ring and imagining my future. The sound behind us was wet, final. Then silence. Then my sister's footsteps on grass-riddled gravel catching up, the tyre iron still in her hand, the metal dark. I didn't look at closely. She didn't speak. She just walked past us, toward the cottage, and we followed because there was nothing else to do, no one else to follow. nowhere else that might hold whatever came next. I looked at my hand. The ring was still there, still marking me as Mrs. Caldwell, as someone who had made promises in a world that no longer existed, as a woman who had been married for 8 hours and widowed in a lane she couldn't name. I walked into the dark. Behind me, the thing that had been my husband lay still on the verge, and ahead of me, the cottage waited with its locked door and its borrowed time. And I understood finally that survival was not a gift, but a debt, one that would keep collecting for as long as I kept breathing.
Thank you for listening. This testimony has been added to the History of the Zombie War archives. New accounts are released twice monthly, from the very first days to the more memorable days of the war, from wherever the outbreak found ordinary people. Subscribe to hear where it started, to hear how it spread, to hear how someone else survived. The archives are still growing. Every testimony we recover is a light against the dark, a voice that says, I was here, I saw, I am still here. We have survived.